Good morning. First of all, thank you very much to Lorraine and to everybody at JISC Collections for inviting me to speak today. I feel that I ought to really start with a confession, which is, hello, my name is Anna, and I'm not a librarian, nor am I an information specialist. I am, however, as they said, a public policy expert with a background in the BBC and Parliament, as well as a special advisor in government. So what I hope to bring to Sconnell is an understanding of that world, which is going to throw up so many challenges for our members going forward. And I hope that, my main role, I think, is to help our members navigate those rather choppy waters, and perhaps to help the wider academic and political community fully appreciate the enormous contribution that academic libraries make both to the education of young people, to the success of our academic community, but also the contribution of university libraries to the overall health of the economies of the nations and regions. I think it's very easy when you're embedded in a sector, in an institution, to look at the differences between one institution and another, and to perhaps forget to take for granted that the core value of what you do is fully appreciated. Now, I'm not sure that is entirely the case. Now, when I think decision makers, when they think about an academic library, what that equals in their mind is the Brotherton or the Bodleian. So they see a beautiful building, yes, important and inspirational, yes. But this sort of mental image of books and buildings doesn't necessarily capture the full work of a modern library. So modern librarians do support teaching, and even are teaching themselves. It doesn't capture the enormous conversion between library and information services, which is one thing I found very striking in my first couple of months. And it doesn't capture the growing importance of the provision of content in digital form to academics and to students alike. Which brings us to the excellent work of JISC Collections. I'd like to thank them actually on behalf of our members for the valuable service they provide. As one member said to me, if they didn't exist, we would have to invent them. And I think that's a tribute to what you've done. As somebody who spent a lot of their career looking at the interaction between markets, states, and sort of civil society, I've watched their work with great interest. From the outside, scholarly publishing looks very much like a public-private partnership to me. And by public-private partnership, I mean a collaborative programme between the public sector and the for-profit part of the private sector. Now, there's an enormous number of characterisations of PPPs, but the easiest way perhaps is to look at the end user. So in some, it is the end user of the service who pays the cost, and in others, it is the government who carries the cost of that. Now, in the case of scholarly communications, I think the picture is rather more nuanced. So, the original content is provided by the hard work of academics, working in institutions which enjoy, at the moment certainly, significant financial support from the government and support from student fees. Now, obviously this may change in the future, but that's very much the picture at present. So that content is then reviewed by other academics, and we know, thanks to the work that JISC Collections commissioned, we got a good idea what the value of that now is, which is up to about 162 million as on a conservative estimate. And again, that money is coming from the taxpayer's pocket and from the student's pocket. Now, that content is then passed over to the private sector. The process is managed, the content is collated, packaged and distributed by publishing companies. Now, librarians and others then buy back that content on behalf of individual institutions. Now, speaking personally, I'm a fan of public-private partnerships. Properly constructed, they can really bring together and play to the strengths of different partners. Now, the central aim of any PPP is the release of that full potential of public sector assets. When they work well, the overall impact can be bigger than the sum of the individual parts. So it is a real case of added value. And there's a wealth of public policy literature that looks at the characteristics of effective public-private partnerships, what needs to be in place to ensure that that value is delivered. What they all stress is that PPPs need to be based on, among other things, win-win scenarios, so where everybody benefits from the process. Cost sharing and cost saving allocated on the basis of the value of the contribution, and similarly risk sharing commensurate with the value that the parties bring. My concern, to be frank, is that in the area of scholarly publication, it fails some of these tests currently. It's not at all clear to me that all parties are winning to the same extent, and that is, I think, a threat to their long-term survival. I mean, currently academics clearly do benefit from their work being published, and indirectly universities do too, because of the value that that brings in terms of the income from academic research. Publishers clearly benefit in terms of their lucrative market, and libraries benefit from being able to provide the content that their students and academics require. But I'm not at all sure that everybody is winning to the same degree, and it isn't at all obvious to me that costs are being shared on the basis of value. I can imagine a number of different models for academic publishing which might represent a more balanced distribution of value and cost. And I would urge the publishers here to conduct a similar thought experiment. Can you imagine a different scenario? And we heard that they've been arguing for disintermediation in one form, but I would argue that there is a strong push towards disintermediation in other areas too. So I think there is a danger that publishers will fall into the trap that the music industry fell into 5 years ago and defend the status quo in the face of significant technological change. Find yourself outpaced by that technological change and changes in consumer behaviour. I'm not drawing a parallel with illegal file sharing. I'm a fan of copyright, but I've watched with great interest in the record industry the way that young musicians have looked at the new technologies and grasped their potential, and they have dispensed with the traditional role of record companies because the technology allows them to communicate directly with their audiences. And you could view it as, in terms of markets, you could view it like this. So the artist provides the content, the record company have been packaging and disseminating that content, and the consumer's buying it. But young musicians starting a band these days look at that arrangement and they're not all sure that they recognise that their value is being fully recognised in that traditional arrangement. Some also argue that their ultimate consumers are paying too much for that content. So, in reality, what seems to have happened is the technological changes have meant that that packaging and dissemination role has actually reduced in value with the arrival of new technologies, which is a hard lesson of the market, but I think it's one we should all bear in mind. Relatively suddenly, the record industry found it had been YouTubed. It's a bit of an abuse of the English language to turn YouTube into a verb, but effectively that's what happened. Musicians were distributing their music at minimal cost. And developing a fan base that was actually sizable enough to provide them with an income to manage without and to go into new recordings and new areas of creativity. Now, record companies have been really scrabbling to catch up. They're still around, but they're developing new business models and they're doing it on the hoof, and it's not been a very comfortable position for them. I fear that if publishers are not careful, they'll be in the same position. I don't think we have any idea yet what the technological changes that are coming will really mean for academic publishing. I think it's hugely exciting and even sort of awe-inspiring. When I started my career, I remember as a researcher, I remember that the desk, that this bookshelf behind my desk, had all 32 volumes of the Encyclopaedia Britannica. Well, it's just unthinkable now as an idea. So the challenges for all of us, and particularly perhaps for those of us who started in an analogue world, is to look at that potential. And I would say to the head of academic publishing at the Publishers Association, I'm not sure if he's here today, but he told the Times Higher that libraries should respond to significant increases in journal costs by cutting staff. Now, I think that shows a real lack of understanding of the current environment and of the actual role of libraries. Staff aren't a luxury for libraries, any more than content is. They provide an extremely valuable role linking the teaching and research functions of the university with the library. They ensure that researchers have the content they need for their research and that graduates have access to their core texts. They also ensure, in many cases, that young people have the skills to locate, manage and utilise information. And they provide an important teaching role in that respect.